Host this on behalf of the Heritage Foundation. I'm the director of the DeVos Center here, which is the center at Heritage Foundation that handles the issue of life. And this is a historic week, obviously. In fact, I can't imagine a better time for us to host this event than the one that we have this morning. I want to mention that we're co-hosting this with our friends at the National Review Institute and the Ethics and Public Policy Center. So thanks for joining us. So we are packed with a discussion about this brand new book, and so I know you all know about this, but it's a brand new book by Ryan Anderson and Alexandria DeSanctis. And so afterwards, for those of you that are here in person, feel free, if we have copies of the book for sale, you can get them signed and you can actually talk to the authors as well. But let me just very briefly introduce our panel and then I'll hand it over to them. First, our moderator this morning is Catherine Jean Lopez. Catherine is a senior fellow at the National Review Institute, where she directs the Center for Religion, Culture, and Civil Society. She's also editor-at-large at National Review and has been on the editorial staff of National Review since 1997. So Catherine, I assume you must have started as a college intern, given that. She's published widely in Catholic and secular publications and is also a nationally syndicated columnist with Andrews McNeil Universal. She's the author of A Year with the Mystics, Visionary Wisdom for Daily Living, and speaks frequently on faith in public life, virtue, and prayer. Ryan Anderson's the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and he's also the founding editor of the Public Discourse, which is the online journal of the Witherspoon Institute. And he also, this is not in his bio, but he was actually my predecessor here at the Heritage Foundation for many years. He's author or co-author of 5 books, including this brand new book, Tearing Us Apart. But his previous book, which has the distinction of being banned from Amazon, is When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment. Anderson's research has been cited by 2 Supreme Court justices, Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas, in 2 Supreme Court cases. Alexandria DeSanctis is a visiting fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, where she covers abortion policy and the pro-life movement, as well as other key topics at the intersection of politics, culture, and religion. She's also a staff writer at the National Review Institute and does regular reporting for the National Review print magazine, as well as National Review online. She also hosts National Review's podcast, For Life, and she's a 2016 graduate of the University of Notre Dame and co-author with Ryan Anderson of this terrific new book. Please welcome our panelists.
Thank you all for joining us. I still can't quite believe this is the first Monday after Roe, and yeah, we couldn't have a timelier discussion, obviously. We're going to talk a little bit about Dobbs, obviously, up top, but I have to share, so the title of this book is Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing. And a couple of months ago, I was on the streets of Manhattan outside Planned Parenthood at a Witness for Life that has been going on for 15 years outside Planned Parenthood, people praying the rosary across the street from Planned Parenthood. And the New York City for abortion rights people have gotten to know me. They protest our prayer. And so one morning, they come up to me and say, "Oh, Catherine Jean Lopez, thank you for joining us. It was so good of you to join us. What are you going to blame on abortion in the National Review today?" And I thought, oh my goodness, they're reading us. Because there's a whole lot that traces back to abortion, as the 2 of you go through in the book. So there is hope that we can convert hearts and minds, even those who are most hostile. So, Ryan, can I start with you? What were your first thoughts, and as you've been processing what happened? Of course, we knew that would probably happen. You kind of took a gamble that it would happen on this book, because this book is really a handbook for post-Roe America. And so the timing couldn't be better. So,
sure. I mean, a couple of thoughts. I mean, one is Alexandra and I last fall could count to 5 when the state of Mississippi asked the Supreme Court not only to uphold their 15-week law protecting babies after 15 weeks of life in the womb. They didn't just ask the court to uphold that. They actually asked the court to overturn Roe and Casey, which was a bold move by the state. And so I think the Attorney General and the Solicitor General there deserve a lot of credit for doing what conventional wisdom told them not to do. Conventional wisdom said, go for what Roberts is going to do in his concurrence, and just asked to uphold the 15-week bill and then keep Roe and Casey in place. We could count to 5 thinking there's now 5 votes to do it. But I think conservatives have been burned so many times by the court that it was cautious hope, right? It's always prepared for the worst, because if you're a conservative at the Supreme Court for the past 50 years, that's what you came to expect. So even after the leak, we were like, this is great, but there's still a chance that the chief pulls over someone to his opinion. So Friday morning at 10:10, when all of us were on SCOTUS blog refreshing, and I guess it was at the Supreme Court's website refreshing, because SCOTUS blog has the live feed. It was just great. It's actually happening. This isn't Charlie Brown when the football gets pulled away one more time. But then it was also a sense of like, well, now we have to work that much harder. Overturning Roe was just a preliminary step. We should celebrate. We should actually give a lot of thanks to the past 49 and a half years of pro-life scholars and activists who made this moment possible. Be very cognizant that there are people whose names will never be celebrated, people who labored largely unknown to us, who actually kept, one, this cause alive, and then two, laid the foundation. Most every argument that Zan and I rehearse in the book, someone else originally developed. We have, 50 pages of endnotes, and those are the people who, we're building off of. But then it was, first I would say it was a moment of relief, like this actually happened, gratitude, and then it was, now we got to get to work.
Right, right. Alexandra, I have to explain if you don't follow her. I was so grateful when you came on the staff of National Review, because I never have to read a Planned Parenthood annual report ever again, because you are so on top of everything, and it's really a great service that you provide. One example would be Kate Smith from ABC or was she CBS? CBS, and you just doggedly followed her reporting. And said she was doing Planned Parenthood's PR, so now she's actually working for Planned Parenthood. So congratulations on helping her realize her true vocation, I guess. What were your reactions to Friday?
I think, kind of like Ryan said, it was not surprising in the sense that we sort of knew it was coming for a long time, but it also was just kind of shocking that it actually was over. Right when I was growing up, I've been pro-life my whole life, and I've been doing this work at NR for 6 years, which is a microcosm of what most people in the movement have been doing, but it just never kind of felt real that in my lifetime this might actually be over, right? And for it to sink in, it almost hasn't sunk in. It's been a couple of days now. It's still kind of like, wow, Roe is actually over, right? It's so momentous, and it almost feels kind of anticlimactic, because the fight is now going to just go on, right? Abortion's not over today because Roe is gone. But certainly, yeah, the gratitude for people that we'll never hear about or know, most of whom, that's kind of why we're here, right? We know the big names, and all of those people are important, but all the work has been done at the grassroots level that we won't hear about. And I think that's really important to keep in mind.
And that point that you make is so essential, that abortions have not ended in America. Now, there are some states where trigger laws are now in place and whatnot, but also the reality is there are pills by mail. Abortions are still happening in America. And in states like my own New York, we're going to have more abortions. Our governor wants us to be an abortion destination. What a wonderful goal for a state. One of the things that gives me hope is that polling, as you go into, makes clear consistently, people don't know what Roe is. They don't know it's all 3 trimesters of abortion. People who describe themselves as pro-choice, they want to know that women in tough situations have options. They're not waking up in the morning wearing stickers. As I got into Union Station, I saw people leaving Saturday's rally, and it says abortion on demand without apology. That is not most people in America who describe themselves as pro-choice. So if we can get past the media and the mobs, this book can convince people, or at least the facts in this book, if we make use of them. What gives you hope? I'll start with Zan.
I think, like you mentioned, just kind of remembering that what we see and hear from the pro-abortion movement is not where most people are. And it's kind of hard to remember that, because really all we hear about is, most Americans, 7 in 10 Americans support Roe. How could the court do this? Or we see the pictures of the angriest people outside the Supreme Court, or we see the pictures of the destruction at pregnancy resource centers that the kind of angriest pro-abortion supporters are now perpetrating. But that's not where most people are, and I think most conversations I've had about abortion with people who disagree with me are mainly just worried about women, right, and what's going to happen to women. And I think part of what kind of brought the idea for this book to mind was that if this is the taking of an innocent human life, this isn't good for anybody. And so while that's a depressing thought, and we have a lot of work to do to convince people of that, that's actually an amazingly powerful argument, right? If you can say to somebody, women really need this, I'm worried about women, and you say, actually, this isn't good for women either, let me explain why. And if they're sincere, they really want legal abortion because they're worried about women, and we're correct, then they're winnable, right? And that's, I think, a huge number of people, almost everybody who supports abortion, if they actually are open-minded, they care about what's best for women and for everybody in our society. They're winnable with not only what's in our book, but probably more that the pro-life movement has to offer.
And Ryan, you do have a chapter that really gets into how it's bad for women, like physically and mentally, and one of the things that this book makes clear, and we have, these are like historic relics, we have some outside the end row issue of National Review, where we go into bad science, bad law, bad history, bad for women. Obviously children die in the midst of this. What good is there in this? Can you talk a little bit about some of the most important points in that realm?
Sure. So I would say the most important area, this is, I guess, the second chapter of the book about how abortion harms women, is the overarching worldview that it puts forward. So even more important than the physical harms that both surgical abortion, and then I think it's at a 2 to 3 times greater rate, the risk of chemical abortion to women, greater than the physical harms, greater than the regret, the emotional, psychological harm. I would say the way in which abortion as equality, so the Ruth Bader Ginsburg style argument, has allowed us to sustain a culture in which the male way of being human, the male way of embodiment, is taken as the norm, and my wife's way of being human is somehow a defective version of my way of being human. And then we structure our higher education system, our employment system, our economy, our entire culture around my body being normal, her body being somehow dysfunctional. For her to be equal to me, she needs to sterilize her body, and then if the sterilization fails, she needs to kill her child who is viewed as a threat, a competitor to her equality. Rather than doing what all of the original women's rights advocates, and this is where Alexandra and I, our colleague at EPPC, Erica Bacchiacchi, has done such beautiful scholarship, pointing out that they took seriously equality. They understood equality to not mean sameness. And they wanted both laws and cultural systems, social systems, to take each way of being human equally seriously, and structuring society around the equal dignity of the female way of being human. As penance for my sins, I have a really aggressive confessor, and he makes me listen to the New York Times podcast, The Daily. And so this morning when I was driving in, I was listening to The Daily, and they interviewed 4 different workers at abortion clinics that were shut down on Friday because of the Roe decision, the Dobbs decision overturning Roe. And it was just tragic listening to this, because they really believe that they are now unable to help women experiencing unplanned or crisis pregnancies. And some of them, broke up during the podcast episode, saying that, I felt so bad. There's nothing I could do to help this woman. All I could do was give her the name and the phone number of an out-of-state abortion clinic. And not once, it's a half an hour long podcast interviewing 4 different employees of abortion clinics. Not once did they say, we could help these women choose life. We could help give them other options to this. And just how tragic it is that, for the past 49 and a half years, Roe has built up an entire unjust social structure in which women's equality means access to abortion. So one of the things that gives me hope is now the people who have been making these arguments, like Erica, for so long, now they have greater purchase. Erica was on CBS Sunday News yesterday, and Jan Crawford asked her, wait, are you saying that abortion's bad for women? And her response was, yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. And it was as if it was shocking, this is a new revelation, people are hearing it for the first time, but they are hearing it for the first time. And that's the importance of what we now have to do, right? I mean, what the court did last Friday was open up this space for us to now persuade our neighbors and then to pass laws that'll protect both babies and mothers.
And we need to be very calm and patient, knowing that even though we've been hearing and making these arguments our entire lives, other people are hearing it for the first time. I was really struck watching another Sunday show by how preposterous the pro-life view seemed to be to everybody around the table except Peggy Noonan. um, Alexandra, what gives you hope? And also, did anything surprise you in the midst of putting this book together?
Positive surprises?
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
say, I don't know that there was much positive in the book, and I remember when we were working on the introduction, we put a heavy emphasis on how all of this is important because life is good. Because after writing the whole book, I was like, man, this is awfully depressing. We have to remind people this is not just like a grim march through the kind of history of abortion and the lies that sustain it, although that is what most of the book is. But I think all of that is, that matters because we all kind of know fundamentally that life is good. But I don't know, yeah, besides kind of the winnability of the argument, I don't know that much gives me hope. I like the point Ryan raised about people listening now. I think that's true, right? It kind of, things feel lighter and more open that we kind of have this chance to make the case in a way that we haven't. And I think Roe being gone is a good thing, obviously, because our laws can be changed now. But it's good because the other side can't point to it anymore. Like it used to be the case that when you make the pro-life argument, the other side would just say, oh, it's the law of the land, right?
Right.
Roe v. Wade's law of the land, this is the Constitution, go away. That's not true anymore. And so they might say, it used to be the law of the land, or the court was wrong, but that's going to fade away. They can't say that forever. And so I think now there's going to have to be people coming to the table from the other side making their best case, which they don't have a good one, right? Their best case is it's the law of the land. They can't say that. And so I think the fact that is the new conversation is a good sign for us, or a good opening for us.
Robbie George from Princeton, your mentor, was on Twitter or Facebook or something this weekend talking about being at a colleague's house who's pro-choice.
I saw that.
And she had on her refrigerator her grandchild's ultrasound. And so they were able to have a conversation just on the humanity, the obvious humanity there, outside of a context of a political debate, right? Yep. And that is where we need to meet people, because politics and media are not our friends on this issue necessarily. Obviously, we have to have policy and political debates, but it's the place of pouring salt on wounds all too often, unfortunately. So the more we can leverage relationships to have long-term efforts to persuade, the better. In the book, and I found this hopeful, being reminded, while the deep concern of a woman bearing an unwanted child merits consideration and sympathy, it's my personal feeling that the legalization of abortion on demand is not in accordance with the value which our civilization places on human life. Wanted or unwanted, I believe that human life, even at its earliest stages, has certain rights which must be recognized: the right to be born, the right to love, the right to grow old. When history looks back at this error, should recognize this generation as one which cared about human beings enough to halt the practice of war, to provide a decent living for every family, and to fulfill its responsibility to its children from the very moment of conception. That was not Henry Hyde. Would you like to tell us who that was, Ryan?
Sure. That was Senator Ted Kennedy. The pro-life Catholic Senator Ted Kennedy, before he evolved in this issue. Before so many, you should ask the question, but before I...
No, go ahead, go ahead.
So
you know the question.
Yes, without even, the context in which Alexandra and I quote that's a letter from Senator Kennedy back in 1971 to one of his constituents, explaining why he's pro-life. And it's because he was in favor of the little guy, defending the little guy. At one point, the Democratic Party and Catholic Democrats, pro-life Democrats, we're all about, we're not looking for the big guy. We're not in favor of corporations. We're in favor of protecting the little guy. And who's the littlest amongst us? The unborn baby. And one by one, they've all caved. They've all evolved. They've all...
Joe Biden, Dick Durbin, the list goes on.
Joe Biden back in, I think it was 1982, we cite this in the book. He proposed the Hatch Amendment, which would have more or less done what Dobbs did this past Friday, is return the question to the states. That's what the Hatch Amendment, which he voted the discharge petition to get it out of committee. It's sad, it's tragic, especially as some of these elected officials are nearing their deaths.
Yeah.
I pray for their eternal souls, because, what they have done for the sake of political office, undermining a basic moral truth.
Right.
The basic moral truth about the value of that life in the womb, made in the image and likeness of God. And to throw that away just for political office. what we point out in that chapter of the book is like, how much better would our politics in the United States be if pro-life voters had a meaningful choice between two parties,
Right.
neither of which was committed to a fundamental injustice. Now, I'm conservative on other issues, so we can debate on the merits, various other reasons why you might want to vote one way or the other, but it would just be healthier for our polity if neither political party was committed to injustice. So then we could actually debate those other things on the merits, but so many voters feel hostage to one political party, and many of those same voters feel that that political party has just taken them for granted, right? So another thing that we're now going to enter into is you can no longer just say, well, I'm against Roe v. Wade and I'll vote to confirm justices, right? All of a sudden it's like, well, now what are you going to do, right? What legislation are you going to put forward? What legislation are you going to vote for, both to protect the child in the womb, protect the mother, assist that mother? And I think this is now going to be kind of a put up or shut up moment for the Republican Party.
Right.
And many of us who have worked in DC know who are those Republican elected officials who campaign on being pro-life, get to DC, and then not only do nothing, like actively try to undermine the cause in the meetings of leadership, right? Various officials saying, don't bring that bill to a vote, it's divisive, right? Now is the time to actually exercise moral leadership on these issues. And I think we'll discover it's popular with voters. Right. The public opinion polls. I mean, there was a stupid tweet over the weekend from the president of France, condemning the decision in Dobbs. The Mississippi bill protects unborn babies at 15 weeks. France protects them at 12. Right? France apparently is more regressive. I mean, it's just utterly ridiculous. And as more and more of our voters discover that it's I think there are 42 European nations that allow abortion. 39 of the 42 have laws more protective than the Mississippi law. At least as protective 15 weeks or earlier, 39 of the 42 European nations that allow abortion. We are the outlier.
Right, with North Korea and China,
yes.
Which is not a company that I want to be in, right?
And now, obviously, we don't want to end up with Europe, right? If the final kind of where we end up in the United States is just to have Germany and France's abortion laws, considering that I think it's 92% of all abortions take place before 15 weeks, that's not really going to be an acceptable outcome either. I mean, these are starting points to the eventual goal of every life being protected in law and welcomed in life. That's still the goal, and incrementalism has to be at the service of that ultimate goal.
The reason why the Ted Kennedy quote gives me hope is that these guys, well, hopefully when he went to his maker, he repented. The ones who are still around still have an opportunity, and they know better, and science and everything else knows better. And don't tell me that they don't enjoy their grandchildren's ultrasounds, because of course they do. That having been said, Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, her first tweet in reaction to the leak of the draft of the Dobbs decision was to bemoan the fact that she has to fight for her infant granddaughter's right to choose. Like, you're seriously thinking about your granddaughter having an abortion. And what if your daughter had chosen? And anyhow, Zan, can you talk a little bit about, do you have hope for the Democratic Party? I mean, you've written in the book, you talk about Dan Lipinski, who's a heroic man, who of course was primaried out of Congress. Can you talk a little bit about the Democrats, and is there any hope there?
Well, I like that letter in particular, and there are a lot of examples of this. What I've always thought about, I think my dad's the first one who introduced me to this thought, so I should give him credit for this. But if you look at kind of the old Catholic pro-life Democrats, their kind of iterations of why they were pro-life pre-Roe, like that letter, for example, they acknowledge the humanity of the unborn child, right? Pretty much unanimously. Then when they flip-flop, none of them ever came out and said, I've looked at the science here, I've thought about it more, and I don't think these are human beings anymore, right? They always evolve and say, well, I've thought about it, and I think, this is about, well, woman's right to choose, or a government shouldn't get in between a woman and her doctor, or some kind of political euphemism about women. They've never said, this isn't a child. I've changed my mind about how I used to think this was a human being. They never said that. And so while that's depressing, and it shows kind of the callousness of what they did, it also shows that what they thought initially is true, and they know that, right? A couple months ago, when Biden was asked about this, he said, he used the phrase abort a child, right? He knows what this is.
He did it again in his rant on Friday.
I mean, something is probably not quite right with him, but inside somewhere he knows that this is a child, like everybody does. And so I think there's some hope to be found in that, right? Kind of the truth is just in there. We all know what it is in some sense, even the people who flip-flop for political reasons. In terms of hope for the party, I think, I don't know. I kind of wonder how things will shake out, and I think there will be different political incentives with Roe gone. And I don't know, I don't have a ton of hope about the National Democratic Party tomorrow, but I do have hope that the kind of the vice grip of Planned Parenthood and NARAL on the Democratic Party is looser today than it used to be. And Democrats in Louisiana have a lot more kind of political clout, pro-life Democrats in Louisiana, than they once did, right? States, yeah. What's happening in states is what's most important today in America in terms of abortion law. And that doesn't mean there's nothing to do at the federal level, but what Nancy Pelosi says about abortion has a lot less power. Right. And I think that changes the calculus if you're her or somebody else about what you say about abortion. And maybe there's more room for Democrats to be honest about it with themselves and have kind of loosen the vice grip on their shoulders from these abortion groups.
Over the weekend, when I'm in an Uber, it becomes like a confessional, and the driver just starts talking to me. And so on Saturday, he started, black man.
Are you the confessor or are you the confessee?
I'm the confessor, apparently. It's not sacramental. We have priests in the audience, don't worry. But so he started talking about the demonstrators in town and how he doesn't get why they're so mad, because we don't really need abortion. There's a 20-something black man from Baltimore. And he said, I got in a lot of trouble with my mother talking about this, but if people were just not like randomly hooking up, we wouldn't need abortion so much. And if they just waited until they were in love, we wouldn't need abortion so much. And he said, but all the women in my life say I'm wrong. And I said, sir, we need more men like you. Ryan, can you talk a little bit, because you do just talk personally, as you've been pro-life for as long as I've known you, and I assume longer than that. And we've known each other since you were an undergraduate at Princeton. And how has being a father changed you? And do speak about the responsibility of men in this.
Yeah. No, great questions. I mean, I would say what changed when I became a father was not anything about the underlying truth of the matter or the underlying, like what it is that, I'm convicted on this issue. It was just how deeply convicted, right? The first time you see that ultrasound image of your child, I was here last week for something that Heritage did, and, I mentioned, like, when I first saw his face, I didn't even know it was his face yet, right? Because when the first time you're seeing the 12-week ultrasound, you don't know which end is which. And the ultrasound technician points this, but it was him all the same, right? I mean, that is exactly what a 12-week-old human being looks like. And the ultrasound technician, first said, I got the order backwards when I spoke here last time, but the first thing he says, that's your baby's heartbeat. Because the first thing they're trying to do is to detect a heartbeat to make sure your baby's thriving in the womb. Then they say, that's your baby's face, right? They never say the word fetus. Right? Mm-hmm. They never say cardiac polar activity, some euphemism for the heartbeat. We all know what it is.
And Anna wasn't a birthing person?
No, she was a mother. It's amazing how the dissenters knew that it was women and mothers all throughout the dissent. But so all I would say is that it just makes it more impactful, like deeper, because almost there's like an emotional level, very cognitive, right? Mm-hmm. I've read probably tens of thousands of pages on both sides of the abortion issue. My first job out of Princeton was as Robbie George's research assistant for a book he was doing titled Embryo, An Offensive Human Life. He was serving on the President's Council on Bioethics at the time. I actually opened up some of the research briefs that I wrote for him back in June of 2004 as we were drafting some of the chapters of this book, because those notes were still very relevant. The arguments hadn't changed. But I would just say, so it didn't change my viewpoint, it just made it more impactful. But then the second part of your question was like the role of fathers, the role of men. I think this is where this book intersects with some of the work that I've done on the marriage debate and just on human sexuality in general. I do not think we ultimately build a culture of life unless we also restore a marriage culture. And that part of restoring a marriage culture needs to be restoring a sound understanding of human sexuality. I'm talking off the cuff here. I think the statistic is that 3% of abortions are from, 3% of abortions are from married mothers. That the safest place to be if you are conceived is inside of marriage. Marriage is the greatest protector of unborn children because marriage helps protect that mother. Right? Having Maggie Aller, famously, I first heard this from her, and she would make the argument that the way that you get men and women to commit to children is to get men and women to commit to each other first. And that's why marriage is so important. We can have the best pro-family policy in terms of paid family leave and prenatal child support and child tax, if we don't actually solve the cultural problem of getting men and women to commit to each other and to stay committed in marriage, having people understand that sex is for marriage, it's not recreational activity the way that your Uber driver also understands. I think it needs to be a both and, that we need to respond to the sexual revolution in its totality and respond to abortion, which is something that fueled the sexual revolution, but is also something that then became necessary because of the sexual revolution, which is a symbiotic relationship there. We need to be holistic in our response.
And that's been a consistent argument that the other side has made, that you can't overturn Roe because our society needs it now. Like, everybody's adjusted to it. And in the book, Alexandra, you talk a lot about the culture. And one thing that I'm always affected by is if you spend time outside of abortion clinics, they're not middle-class women, exercising their empowerment. 17-year-old black girls are what I meet the most in New York City, who are being forced by their mothers, I'm thinking of one in particular who was afraid to tell the boyfriend. And anyway, I think about those girls, and you think about the pop culture, and the music is telling women use or be used. You gotta use them first, and they're not taught about abstinence. That's like unheard of. You could never do that. This poor guy with the Uber with all the women telling him he's crazy. Can you talk a little bit about the culture, and do you see any bright spots?
Keep asking me for hope. I don't have very much to give.
I know. Why am I asking?
Ask Ryan about his hope. No, that's a really interesting question.
I'm trying to get you to be more hopeful.
I'll see if I can get there. I do have some thoughts about this, though, because the reaction on Instagram, just from my age demographic to this decision, is appalling. And so I think a lot about where are these people coming from, right? That all these women my age think that their rights have been taken away, that their life is over now. Like, that's, obviously I disagree. I think they're wrong, but it's coming from somewhere sincere for most of them. And I think it's really important to get to the bottom of what's driving that. So I'll say two things. The first is, we actually have an anecdote in the book that speaks very much to what you were just saying about the abortion clinics. I was doing an interview a couple years ago for National Review, and I spoke to this woman, Christina Bennett, you probably know her, who has done many things in the pro-life movement, but a lot of counseling outside of crisis pregnancy centers, primarily in Connecticut, most recently. And she told me the story about how there was some pro-abortion group that was handing out candles that said abortion is magical on them to their volunteers. And she said to me, if I were to take one of these candles to the inner city Hartford abortion clinic and try to hand them out to the girls going into that clinic, none of them want those candles, right? Mm-hmm. That's not their reality. These women are getting abortions because they have kids at home and can't put food on the table, because their partner's forcing them to do it, whatever the case might be. They're doing it out of desperation. This is not some wonderful choice they're making that's good for them. And that's by and large the story of abortion. And we hear a very different story, like, it's great that there are 80% of Planned Parenthood clinics in low-income minority neighborhoods. That's not a great thing. If that's true and those women really feel like they need it, we have work to do, and it's not to build more abortion clinics. And I think it's all kind of fueled by this underlying assumption that freedom is just participation in sex at any point with anybody with no consequences. And so women my age think, well, men can do that, right? That's what we're all doing. It's assumed that that's what life is about right now. Men can do that and walk away. Why can't I? And so when you overturn Roe v. Wade and maybe in their state suddenly they can't walk away, right? And this is where it goes back to our colleague Erica's work. Walking away from pregnancy for a woman is an act of violence against their own child, right? And it's plenty bad for a man to walk away and abandon the mother of his child and his child. But for a woman, that's an act of violence, and she's not better off for having to choose that so that she can participate in the fun sexual culture the way men can. But that's kind of the lie we have to unravel. And so I guess it's hopeful in some ways that we can now kind of change the laws and get through to people a little bit more. But I think unraveling that is a really, really big task, and it's very hard to get to the root of that kind of dysfunction.
Storytelling is so important, and thank you for doing that at National Review. Even in recent days, there was a Washington Post piece about this teenage girl who couldn't have an abortion in Texas. Yeah, and the writers clearly wanted us to be outraged that this poor girl has twins now, and she and her boyfriend are like making it work. and there are pictures of them, and they're adorable, and we're supposed to want those babies to be dead. I think so, because of this reality that you speak to, Alexandra, there's sincerity here. But the more this is out in the open and it's a matter of debate, the more, they're telling the story for us without realizing it. It's quite amazing. But Ryan, I wanted to ask you.
And I think that's a cause for hope.
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
When I saw that Washington Post story, I was like, despite their best efforts,
Yes.
this is having the exact opposite impact on readers
Right.
than what they likely intended it to have. Sharif Girgis, frequent collaborator, co-author of mine, he has a piece, I don't know if it's been published yet on SCOTUS blog or not, but SCOTUS blog asked him to write a response to Dobbs, and I was reading a draft of it for him over the weekend, and his last paragraph really struck me as a sign of hope. He says, right now, there are babies alive who were scheduled to be aborted on Friday afternoon, but weren't because of the Dobbs decision. And a year from now, those babies will be making the transition from milk to solid foods. And 2 years from now, those babies will be learning to walk and to talk. And he just goes through the litany of all the life progression, and all because of what the court did this past Friday, right? Because already I think it's, is it 12 states that have had laws that already are being enforced protecting unborn babies. There's another, I think, about 12 states that, there's a 30-day waiting period, or the attorney general has to certify, and then those laws are gonna, lives are being saved. And I think those lives will then be a witness to life, either when something like the Washington Post news story happens, or just within their communities, right, within their families. This was a baby I was scheduled to abort, and I didn't. And now, a year later, 2 years, I'm so glad I didn't, right? I mean, I think many of the things that are the greatest blessings in our lives are actually things that we didn't choose for ourselves, we didn't necessarily consent to, we might have actively been opposed to it, but it happened anyway, and then only in hindsight can we then view it as a blessing in disguise. And that's not to therefore say that that means that people experiencing unplanned pregnancies don't deserve our support. They do. But I think one thing that gives me hope is that many of these children will then be some of the best witnesses to life a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And we have to do our part to make it that way, that those children are experienced as a blessing in the lives of those families. And that means volunteering, that means donating, that means crafting good public policy, the whole host of things that we now need to do. So those children are blessings, so that they are experienced as blessings is work that we have to do.
Thank you for making me cry. On Friday, it was the Feast of the Sacred Heart. Catholics know, and for reasons I don't fully understand, it's normally the Feast of the Nativity of John the Baptist on that day, but it was this rare Feast of the Sacred Heart, and I just thought that really had to be a providential, message to us.
The planets were also aligned.
The planets.
Yeah. For the non-Catholics.
For the staff. Thank you. But really, I mean, we have to lead with love in everything that we do from this point on. And you were reminding me, Ryan, when you were talking of years ago, when the partial birth abortion debate was a thing during the Clinton administration. Rick Santorum has this story of one night, speaking, those who watch C-SPAN know the empty floor in the Senate, and he called his wife, Karen, and said, I'm going to be home a little later. He just had this nudge that he needed to keep talking. And he was debating Dianne Feinstein at one point. And anyway, 4 years later, he gets the letter from I think it was the mother. It was the mother of the father. And anyway, that night, a couple is watching, just flipping channels, and they stop on C-SPAN for some reason or another. And they're listening to this exchange. And the girl says to her boyfriend, I have an abortion scheduled for tomorrow. And they had a conversation, and the abortion didn't happen. And there was a 4-year-old, I think there was a picture. You just never know when we're having these conversations, and obviously when laws are changing, what lives are being saved. And yeah, I agree entirely. We have to make sure those stories are told, because other stories are going to be told too. we have to be relentless in focusing on the good. So this is being live streamed. This can be watched after the fact. C-SPAN is going to be airing it. Not everyone agrees with us. Alexandra, can you speak to that person who either is on the fence or thinks we're all trying to oppress women?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to do that is just to kind of explain why the idea for this book came to mind. And I think I've spent, like I said, a microcosm compared to most people working in the pro-life movement. But the whole time I've been writing about this issue, I've been thinking to myself, kind of, this idea has been germinating, which is, if we're right as pro-lifers that this is the taking of an innocent human life, that's obviously the fundamental harm of abortion. We have to do everything we can to stop that. But if that's true, how could any aspect of this be good for any of us? Right? How could it actually be a victory for women to enact that kind of violence, not only against a stranger, but their own child? How could it be good for fathers that women are killing their unborn children? How could it be good for the grandparents, the brothers, the sisters, anybody in that family? How could it be good for societies? How could it be good for any of us to live in a society where that's legal or socially acceptable? What kind of society are we if the best solution we have to any set of problems is to kill the most vulnerable people among us? And so I would just say, yeah, if you believe abortion is necessary, think about why, and think about, are the problems that you identify that make you think abortion is the solution really solved by perpetrating violence against innocent, vulnerable human beings? How are any of us really better off?
It's really a moment where the parties need to grow up and really work together to, on the matters that we agree with. We agree that women should, we can agree on some paid family leave bill. We can, we can agree on community health centers need support. There are things we can agree on. Of course, there are no political incentives to do that, but we do need some leaders. Ryan, what's your...
So exactly on that, it was, I think, a week or two ago that Romney introduced his legislative proposal. I think Rubio, was it one Friday afternoon itself, or Rubio has one in the works that will, if it hasn't already been released, it will soon be released. And Republicans are rethinking some of these issues, and that's healthy. I don't mean to endorse either of these as like the perfect end-all, be-all, but these are constructive signs that there are people on the right side of the aisle willing to say, we both want to prohibit lethal violence in the womb, and we want to make family formation more achievable, and we want to make support for women carrying children in their wombs a reality, right? And now, we need the bipartisan part of that to come along. Romney and Rubio are both on the right side of the aisle, but there's no reason why someone on the left side of the aisle couldn't embrace these bills. It should be a bipartisan matter. You see this happening in the states. So Texas got lots of media attention for the heartbeat bill. That same legislative session, they allocated an additional $100 million to the Texas Alternatives to Abortion program. Ron DeSantis, about a month ago, signed into law the Fatherhood Initiative in Florida. A variety of states are doing both and, right? They're both prohibiting lethal violence, and they're providing supports to mothers, and they're providing incentives for family formation, for fathers to be involved in the lives of their children. Marriage, as to my mind, the ultimate pro-life institution, the ultimate social justice institution. So I think that these efforts have already been in the works. They are ramping up. They are increasing. We should be working with them to make them even better. This was 2.0 of Romney's bill. I'm sure 3.0 will be even better. Right? He took into account criticism he got, and he made improvements. There are probably other flaws that could be improved even further, and his office is willing to continually improve it. We should be participating in those discussions.
We also need to be talking about adoption. During the Dobbs debate and the oral arguments in particular, there was a backlash against adoption, also against safe haven laws. We could talk for hours more. Unfortunately, we have to close in a moment, but more conversations. I'm sure we'll have more conversations about this in the coming days and weeks and months. Really critical to make sure that, so often women are asked they rather choose abortion rather than knowing that that they abandoned their child. Meanwhile, there are so many couples struggling with infertility who would love to raise a child who a woman courageously, gave birth to. And so many human conversations we have to have, and and so many stories we have to tell about the pregnancy help centers and the maternity homes. You talk about Mary's Shelter in Fredericksburg in the book, and each one of us who considers ourselves pro-life needs to, as you were mentioning earlier, Ryan, think, what more can I do? Because there's so much more that needs to be done. And I know I had a conversation with a reporter on Friday, and she didn't believe that there were any pregnancy care centers. I mean, really, honestly, didn't believe. And so we have so much work to be done, and I want to thank you for the work that you do. And for this, you did this book in an amazingly short period of time. I'm like the queen of blowing through deadlines myself, so I'm very impressed that you have this ready for this moment. Tearing us apart, how abortion harms everything and solves nothing. Thank you, Alexandra DeSanctis and Ryan Anderson. And thank you for everyone watching here in person or on live stream or on C-SPAN. Please buy the book and share it. And please follow the work of Alexandra DeSanctis and Ryan Anderson. And I'm Catherine Lopez from the National Review Institute, thanking Ethics and Public Policy Center and Heritage Foundation, obviously, for hosting us, and Jay Richards. And for those